The shadow at the bridge, in the quiet outskirts of a small village called Mallowood, where the mist hugged the trees tight and the nights felt endless. Young George Clayton worked at a small, lonely pub on the edge of the town called the Green Hare. George lived in a village house about 3 miles away, and he often walked back home late at night. But the night route was unsettling. It followed a narrow dirt road called Old Rickard Road, infamous for its bone-chilling tales, shadowed by trees that seemed to reach out for anyone who dared walk past them after dark. By the time George closed up, it was well past midnight. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the dense mist that had thickened over Old Rickard Road. The damp cold wrapped around him, and his footsteps echoed in the silent night. Shadows seemed to dance with each step he took, twisting and contorting in ways that made his spine tingle. After about 10 minutes of walking, George reached a bridge near the edge of the forest. That's when he saw him. A lone figure stood just off the road, half hidden in the fog. The man was dressed in old, tattered clothes, and he was waving to George, signaling him to stop. Against every instinct, George hesitated, then moved closer. As he neared, his heart dropped. It was his old school friend Ian, who had mysteriously disappeared over a year ago. No one had seen or heard from Ian since. George had assumed he'd just moved on. But here he was, standing on Old Rickard Road at 1 in the morning. Ian's face was pale, his eyes hollow. He looked at George with a strange, pleading look and asked, "George, can you take me home? I need to get home." George's mind raced, questions swarming his brain, but something in Ian's eyes made him uneasy. The silence between them was suffocating. He tried to ignore his fear and nodded, saying, "Sure, mate, hop on." Ian didn't answer, just gave a weak, haunting smile. They walked side by side for a few minutes, and George's pulse raced with every step. He broke the silence, asking, "Ian, where have you been? Why didn't you come back to town?" Ian didn't answer. The fog thickened, and George felt the air grow colder. Every so often, Ian would give a low, whispering chuckle, one that sent a shiver down George's spine. And then, just as they reached the middle of the bridge, Ian stopped. George turned, and to his horror, Ian's face twisted into something unnatural. His eyes were now pitch black, and a wide, chilling smile spread across his face. "I never left, George," he whispered in a voice that didn't sound like Ian's. "I've been waiting for someone to bring me home." Without another word, Ian climbed over the bridge's edge and leaped into the river below. George screamed, but when he ran to look over the edge, there was no splash, no ripples in the water. It was as if Ian had vanished into thin air. Frozen in terror, George stumbled back and ran, his heart pounding louder than his footsteps. When he finally reached Mallowood, the townspeople gathered around him, asking what had happened, concerned by his wild, fearful eyes. He recounted his story, barely able to keep his voice steady. One of the older townsfolk, a man named Mr. Wainwright, grew pale as he listened. "George," Mr. Wainwright began, his voice trembling. "Ian never moved away. 40 years ago, his grandfather was murdered on Old Rickard Road, and his body was found in the river under that very bridge. Ever since then, it's said that a shadow waits there, a ghost that looks like someone you knew, asking for help until it drags you with it." George was paralyzed with fear, his mind spinning. Who or what had he just seen?